by taking the time to do some reflecting on how dysregulation or how maybe your neurodiversity shows up in your sex and relationships can kind of help to get some self-awareness around what that may look like and how to approach that and what to tell future partners and how to, all that kind of stuff. And kind of same with queerness too, right? Like we are learned a lot of the times a very cishet way of sex ed. And so there's also a lot of unlearning in terms of like, what is sex? What does sex even look like to me? If I take it outside of this, you know, classic, typical P and V type penetration, what does sex even look like for me as potentially a trans person, a lesbian, a non-binary person, etc.
I'm Rachel, and you're listening to the Owning Your Sexual Self podcast. All right, welcome, Emily. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Yeah, I was very excited. This is a very unique topic that we're going to be talking about today, and I think it's unique. Yeah, it touches so many people, probably more than we would realize. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. There's actually a very common interlap that we'll talk about soon.
Yes, I'm so excited when I saw the email come through, I was like, yes, like this is a topic that I've only dabbled in a little bit. And really more towards like highly sensitive people or ADHD and intimacy from a couple of my
Yep.
previous shows. But this like we're talking about, neuroqueer, the spectrum of this. And like when I saw that term come through, I'm like, wow, there's gonna be a lot of listeners that are like, what the hell is neuroqueer? Like, what does that even mean? Um,
I was hoping so because I love to be able to explain it. So,
Yes, yes, yes. Before we get into that, I would love to hear
yes.
from you just like how did you get into this field? Like what led you here?
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm Emily Zawatsky, also known as Emily Zed Sex Ed on the internet. And I'm a Canadian queer sex educator. I have over a decade of experience supporting queer, kinky, and neurodivergent folks as an educator, a writer, and a support worker, both in my local community and out on the internet. I started in this field actually a pretty long time ago, doing your classic teenager risk prevention, condom on a banana type of sex ed. But as a lesbian myself and also working as a support worker with people with disabilities, I just realized that there was like a huge chunk of people not getting relevant or accessible sex ed, myself included.
Mhm.
So I would say like sex education is something that's lacking probably for most people, but then also being queer and or neurodivergent, and all of a sudden now your traditional sex ed just like isn't really about you at all. So using my personal experiences as a newly out queer person at the time and my professional experience, I just kind of started taking it upon myself basically to help close this gap just a little bit and kind of focus my sex ed work specifically more with neuroqueer folks.
Yeah, and then let's get into it. So for
Let's
listeners
get into
that
it.
might be, yeah, like new to the term neuroqueer, how do
Yes.
how do you define this? Like what is it? What's important for us to know about this?
Yeah, well, it is a newer term, and it's basically used to represent the experience of being both neurodivergent and queer. And it's because it's such a common intersection that there have been these new terms created to represent this experience. It also sometimes is referred to as the double rainbow, if you've heard that. They're kind of
Mm-hmm.
both terms that are used to represent this experience. And a lot of this knowledge about this really common intersection comes from a lot of research. A lot of it has been done in the last, I'd say, maybe 5 or so years. They're not that old, but yeah. And so they kind of there shows a lot of this overlap, and I'd be actually really interested to see as new research comes out where that if that interlap grows at all, or if it stays the same, or how that goes. Because yeah, it's a really interesting experience to have to be both yeah neurodivergent and a queer person.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that because I think in society right now, like the word neurodivergent can be a kind of a buzzword right now. Like I think it's a newer
Mhm.
term that we're because it's so historically like we've just known autism, ADHD, like those bigger things on the spectrum, let's say. But
Yes.
neurodivergence, it's like I'm so glad there's more research coming out because I think it just helps not necessarily to label people, right? But I know that labels can also be helpful and just better
Mhm.
understanding ourselves. But I think on that lens, right, to better understand people, to be able to meet people where they're at, because this, especially in the world of sexuality, like it's not a one size fits all. It never has been one
Not
size.
even close. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Like I think it is kind of a like a hot topic right now, like a hot term. But I think it is just because it's being seen, like there's just been getting more representation for it. And I would say it's kind of like almost an umbrella term for a bunch of different ways that the brain can be neurodivergent or not basically not neurotypical, right? So yes, it include things like ADHD and autism, which I feel like are probably the top two that most people think about with
Mhm.
neurodiversity. But there's also like OCD and Down syndrome and so many other things that could be classified under the neurodivergent umbrella.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, just again, like what a wide spectrum of things that most of us in the world like are experiencing some sort of form of neurodivergency, like some sort of tendencies. Maybe somebody wouldn't diagnose us like fully neurodivergent, but yeah.
Exactly.
And it's
And I think
one
like with
of
the
the
common the like this intersection too, I think it's even more important as a queer person. Like it just kind of is more likely that you yourself are also neurodivergent or you might be in a relationship with someone in the future who is neurodivergent. And so having more awareness and education on these things, I think is helpful for even just like the queer community and the neurodivergent community, like separately, even though they are so interlapped as well.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you again for coming on and shedding more light on this. Like, I think
Of
listeners
course.
really, really enjoy this. So what would you say, what are some common myths or misconceptions about neurodivergent or neuroqueer people when it comes to sexuality and relationships?
I don't know about myths per se, but I think like a common challenge that I see is that it's just not inclusive enough. And I think like traditional sex ed specifically I'm referring to. And I think like the effects that that can have can potentially leave a neuroqueer person feeling just not so sexually confident in general. So like not only in terms of representation, but with just things like teaching methods and teaching styles and tools and content and the language that you're using, these can just sometimes not be as efficient or as inclusive of neuroqueer people. And so, like, I think it's subjective a little bit because neurodiversity is such a wide spectrum. But, like, for example, if we were to think about that cliche situation of, a sex ed teacher putting a condom onto banana, like I did, but to show students how to properly use one, if, for example, one of those students was, say, a lesbian with autism who had a really difficult time distinguishing between what is literal and what is not, they might go into their next sexual encounter bringing a condom and a banana into the room and thinking that they're being safe. And that's not her fault. That's not,
Mhm.
that's not to say that like that is her misinterpreting things wrong. That's just saying that that curriculum and the way that that was taught wasn't inclusive of her needs and of her learning styles. And I think so we need to have the goal would be basically sex ed that is more inclusive of both the neurodiverse and the queer audience,
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm. Yeah, that reminds me in my like getting into this business, like doing pure romance parties and educating
Mm,
way, like I would do the hand vulva, like the peace sign upside down, finger like thumb
yes,
through, and I would
love
tell them
that.
this is your clitoris, like this
Yes.
body. And I had a woman that like that's legit what she thought. Like she literally thought this, like her thumb with through her finger, like that was the clitoris. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is like making more sense now. And back then, right, like little naive, uneducated me, I was like, oh, how so funny, like but I'm like, this is not funny, right? Like, how could I have changed things to make it more understandable for everyone that was there?
Yeah, that was a good learning moment for you as well. Like I don't, you're right. Like it's hard for us not to like kind of think those things are like funny because like if for us it just seems so sometimes for the neurotypical brain it just seems so like how'd you get there kind of thing.
Mhm.
But like that's their experience and we have to meet them where they're at because otherwise they're not getting reliable or relevant sex education and then that's just letting them down in the future, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so I'd love to talk more, like move into the sensory part of this. So can you talk about the
Mhm.
role of like what the role of sensory and, needs and emotional regulation in the order or in the way that this gets to create an empowering, enjoyable experience for somebody that is either neurodivergent or neuroqueer?
Sure. So, depending, let's talk about sensory processing. So, depending on how you experience your sensory processing, most neurodivergent folks can usually be over responsive or sensory seeking when it comes to the senses and the sensory systems. And it's possible to be both or all, depending on the sense and everything. So, being over responsive means that you have a lower threshold or like a need for sensory input, whereas sensory seeking means that you have a higher threshold or a higher need for that in sensory input. So if you are over responsive, for example, you don't need as much to sound, for example, that's the sense, but then you get too much of it, it's more likely that it's going to be overwhelming and dysregulating for your system. However, if you are sensory seeking, which means you need more sound, for example, and you aren't getting enough of it, that can also lead to dysregulation as well. And dysregulation can look and feel different for everyone, but it can be emotional, it can be mental, physical, or even all of the above. And in sex specifically, most, if not all, of our senses are being used at one time, which can be super dysregulating or overstimulating when you are neurodivergent. So, emotional or mental dysregulation might include seeming or being distracted, overthinking, possibly crying, which could also be symptoms of something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, also known as RSD. I don't know if you've heard of that. But it's basically like a heightened emotional sensitivity to things like criticism or rejection or even failure. And it's also another super common thing with people who are neurodivergent. So, physically, dysregulation can also look like feeling overwhelmed or potentially having a panic attack. And so I think that these things are super uncomfortable. And obviously, we don't want to have to experience them. But I think that if we can take some time to reflect in a safe space and begin to kind of recognize what causes your dysregulation and how, you can work on trying to figure out how to lessen or maybe avoid it in the future, especially during sex.
Yeah, and that is so helpful too, like for somebody to be able to go within and be able to identify the difference for themselves is like are they seeking or not? And
Yes.
it's so interesting when you're speaking about this, like thinking about clients that I'm working with and how they're describing their sexual experiences to me and the way that it's been challenging for them. And now to have this information to be able to better explain it to them and just help them understand better, like again, there's nothing wrong with you. This is just the way that you process. This is just the way that you see the
Yes.
world. It's like we don't judge a tiger for not having zebra stripes, essentially.
Exactly.
It's
It's
just,
just your nervous system. It is what it is. And you kind of got to learn to almost work with it rather than working against it, because that's just going to cause more friction in the future, especially with something like sex, which, like I said, usually involves more, if not all, one, if not all of the senses at one time, which is a lot.
yeah. Yeah, and so if we move into like communication around this, like how in partnered relationships, how does one communicate this with their partner in a way that just can help them feel more seen and not add pressure to the sexual experience for them?
That is a fabulous question. And I actually have a little story to share. So it's because it is about communication. I actually experienced this myself because I think it's important to note that I myself am not neurodivergent, at least not that I know of, but my wife is. She has ADHD. And fun fact, her name is also Emily. So that's a good time for everyone. But basically, when we first started seeing each other, all the way back in 2018, we actually started out by not having the greatest of sex. And it was really tricky because we couldn't really figure out why. For her, it was extremely dysregulating, like pretty much all the time, both physically and emotionally. And for me, I didn't understand why my partner was basically distracted or even worse, crying or having a panic attack when we were having sex and having these types of dysregulating moments that was taking us both out of the sexual moment. And we didn't really know like what was happening or why. And so that was really frustrating. And then after we got her diagnosis, we kind of realized what we were dealing with. And so we learned to basically approach the situation completely differently, especially in terms of communication and how we were talking about sex. So, with some reflection, we kind of realized that Emily was experiencing often like RSD, that good old rejection sensitivity dysphoria, because usually due to the fact that she was like a newly out lesbian at the time, and so she wasn't really feeling a lot of confidence and stuff.
Mhm.
And so, what in my mind were like these helpful pointers, or just like your regular type of sex talk, like move to the left or try here, she was actually taking that as sexual criticism. And so, how I was used to communicating my pleasure to past partners wasn't really translating to her. So, she was thinking like she was letting me down, or she wasn't doing a good enough job, and all of these stuff. And that was leading to her getting dysregulating and feeling like she was like her nervous system was basically a mess at that point, which was leading to these dysregulating things like crying or being distracted or honestly not even feeling aroused anymore. And so I think like it's not really about getting the diagnosis. I think it was just more so that it was about taking a moment to connect and realize that something wasn't working. And then being, I guess, like really intentional with trying out different ways to communicate until we got it right.
Mhm.
So, like, once again, neurodiversity is a huge spectrum. And so your communication might take some trial and error in terms of what's going to work for you and this relationship and this partner. But I think one of the biggest tips that I can give is to keep most, if not all, of your sex talk actually outside of the
Mhm.
bedroom. You probably use that tip a lot in your practice as well. It's a common one, but I think it goes even further with neuroqueer people because it's things can just feel so intense and scary and awkward when you have to stop play. And then some people just have like a harder time getting back into that. So I think like it's just important to take those moments and talk about the sex outside of the bedroom and outside of the sex so that no one's possibly getting, their RSD triggered or feeling like they're letting someone down or any type of things like that, because that can be a real bummer for everyone. Trust me.
Mhm. Yeah, you're speaking to that of like really taking off the pressure and again going back to meeting somebody where they're at, and you really bring up the themes that I think so many people deal with around intimacy of not being enough or being too much. And that can be incredibly crippling in partnership, right? When that you feel like on
Yeah.
the other end that's not understood of you, or right, that's not being validated, or you're told like, oh, don't feel that way, right? It's like the person is not intentionally meaning to shut you down in that way, but that's what it is. So to be met with that, right, somebody else holding space and somebody else wanting to go there with you and understand it with you, simultaneously not also adding pressure to you of like, you have to figure this out or you need to figure this out.
Yes.
I think that that can just be so, right, that is partnership, right? Like that is beautiful, consensual, empowering partnership right there.
Exactly. And like, it's just so funny because like, and we were in like that newer phase of dating, right? So like we could have easily chalked it up to being like, we're just not sexually compatible, or like we're just like not, we just don't click, or whatever. We don't have that chemistry. But like it wasn't about that at all. And if we did that, like I would have missed out on the love of my life. Like, and that would have been so wild for my life story. But
Mhm.
like it was just about, yeah, like taking the time. And I think it's the intention to like how you communicate and to like find what works for you. And like I said, by keeping it, I think, all out of the bedroom, not in the moment, can be helpful and a lot more relieving for potentially people who are neuroqueer.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think so you are the partner of someone that is neuroqueer. So
I am, yes.
what are some ways that you have like you can identify like frameworks or tools like that you really are able to hold space and be there for the other Emily, your wife
Yeah,
Emily?
yeah, exactly. You
So
can call it that. That's exactly that's
yes.
who we are. Yeah. So I think it like once again, it depends on the person, the partnership, and the neurodiversity, because even like two people with ADHD can experience that completely differently, right? So with my personal experience, yeah, it was about a big thing with M in our relationship was the RSD. That's something that's really big for her, that rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And so we've worked really hard to even like communicating about things, like if I'm upset, like I still need to be able to tell my partner I'm upset about things, or if this isn't working for me sexually, like I still want to be able to confidently say that, but maybe how I'm saying it and like the words I'm using, and even sometimes making it maybe more of like a fun thing or a challenging thing or like a novelty thing, like let's make it a game, or like let's make it less I guess like scary, I guess is the way to put it, or like just make it into more of like a turning it more into like a fun kind of thing, I feel like has really helped us. So we do a lot more of, like I said, those like a little challenge thing, or like, okay, like let's set a goal, or we also use some different tools, because like things like predictability and like knowing what's going on sometimes ahead of time and not being so spontaneous can also sometimes be helpful for neurospicy folks, at least my wife
Mhm.
specifically. So we'll just do things like maybe like scheduling our sex, or we sometimes will use a Google form to like send to each other and be like, what do you want next? Like, what are you thinking? Like, what kind of play are you into? Are we wanting to try something that's maybe going to take a little more time and prep tonight? We just want to be all on the same page with that so that it's not necessarily feeling like you don't know what's going on or you're not feeling prepared for the situation, which can also sometimes leave specifically like neurodivergent people feeling a little bit dysregulated.
Hmm. And what if you come across, so for someone that is neurodivergent, right? Because there's also this camp
Mhm.
of people, it's like, I just don't like that thing. It's not because I'm neurodivergent, like I just don't like that thing. How, and maybe you don't have the answer, but like, how does someone distinguish the difference between that? Like, this is something like I could push that growth boundary with, of like, I maybe want to try to go there or try this thing versus like, no, this is actually going to be traumatizing, triggering, like put me in full shutdown mode. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think like only only you will be able to tell what works for your body and for your brain and for your nervous system. But I think like even kind of like what you were saying to not so maybe not to think about it in such a black and white way. Like, okay, like it doesn't have to be like a yes no. Like, sometimes we use in the industry like these yes no maybe lists, or like the a sex menu kind of thing where like you list different types of activities or things you may be interested in, and it's like a yes no maybe. And that can be great for some people. But if we maybe even put a few more steps into that, like maybe, okay, yes, with this partner, yes, but in this situation specifically, no, but because it's this, you know what I mean? Like put a little bit more situation or people specific behind it, maybe that can kind of I don't want to say like customize it, but customize it, I guess, like in a way that feels right for you. And so you can kind of explore it without diving into something so intensely where it might be dysregulating or whatever. But like if you kind of dip your toe in and you start to feel that dysregulation a little bit, it's easier to back out than it is to like, have fully have jumped in for it
Mhm.
kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you offered that clarity around that. There was a newer version of this list that I saw, and it added the column of curiosity to it, which I really
Yes.
liked. So it was like, yes, I want to do this. Next column, I'm curious about this. I would do this if my partner was into it, is the third one, and then limit, right? Like hard no.
Yes.
That's because those are important too. And I
Absolutely.
like those lists for the sense that's like, okay, if I am a yes, or if I am curious to it, then we can have the conversation, like you were saying, like get into the details around that. I think
Mhm.
that's super important, right? That you don't just see like, oh yeah, they want to have a threesome. Okay, I'm going to set that up for tomorrow night, right? Like it's not, there
Yes.
needs to be conversations around it. Yeah, to really make sure like everybody is on the same page. We could go down the road of consent and all, boundary setting and all of that. Um, but yeah, I thank you for bringing that up of like
Of course.
knowing your partner again, all being able to offer that space of like how are we both going to feel as comfortable as possible going into this, whether it just be under our own roof and the things that we're doing in the bedroom or outside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've seen a newer version of that too. I think it's called like I think I've seen it in the form of like a ladder where you're basically climbing a ladder a little bit at a time, or you can step back down if you tried it in this way and you're like, maybe, but still not a no, but maybe I'll go down the ladder just one more rung just to kind of see. I've
Mhm.
seen that as an example, and I like that because it kind of, like I said, it blends in that gray area a little bit and doesn't have to be so black and white.
Yeah. I'd love Emily to go. This is not on my questions at all, but this is coming up for me right now. So I hope I'm
Yeah,
not
that's
blindsiding you, but I would love to just
okay.
talk a little bit about aftercare. So in the sense of,
Oh,
right, like in sexuality, something happens, like a partner is feeling triggered or overstimulated or in that shutdown, like what either that being you or being the partner of that person, what does aftercare look like, or how could aftercare look like in the sense that creates that safety for them?
great question. Um, yeah, so I think one thing that would be helpful is to have some sort of just also like even before we get to the aftercare, having some sort of like safe word or a safe gesture or like a signal or something to just indicate that like stop, like play is stopping regardless, whether it is for something like dysregulation, or it's just something like I have a Charlie horse, or I want to grab a glass of water. You know what I mean? Because it's stop, like we talked about before, like stopping sex in the moment can kind of be awkward and hard to do. Probably even more so for a neurodivergent person. So having that in place already is like step one, go. And
Mhm.
then I think like if you do, if it is because of dysregulation specifically, I think like it's important to have that conversation before play even begins and to kind of have that more um, deeper talk, because like, it is going to be very specific on the person and what their specific needs are, because everyone has different needs both emotionally and physically. And where I might want my partner to be lying on top of me and only saying soothing things in my ear, someone else might want to be alone in a completely different room for like 15 minutes.
Mhm.
And so I think the problem is like by assuming one or the other and then just like acting upon that without checking first could potentially make the dysregulation feel even worse or more intense. And
Mhm.
so you have to kind of figure out what that looks like for you as the neurodivergent person, as well as for your partner, so that it kind of gives you a plan for if and when something dysregulating happens, you know what that aftercare plan looks like, and you are confident knowing that you're doing what's right for you, for your body, and hopefully we're not like hurting anyone's feelings in the process either, because everyone knows what the plan is.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what you're saying, like taking the conversation outside the bedroom, like having that conversation when you're in a regulated state, because often when
Yes,
we're in that
exactly.
dysregulated state, it's harder to identify what our need is in that moment, you know? Like,
Exactly. It is. It is. And I'm like, like not to like completely compare, but like I do have like anxiety. And I think back to sometimes in my moments when I'm like having an anxiety attack or like really in my anxious feelings. And I'm like, I can't be trusted to make sometimes like
Mhm.
great decisions. I'm not thinking in my best self for my best, to be the best me. So like I think it's important to, yeah, have those conversations and make those things really clear and intentional in the more regulated kind of a state.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, in terms of empowerment and empowered sexuality,
Mhm.
what might that look like for a neuroqueer person or someone that is stepping into this identity as neuroqueer?
I think like figuring out, I think this, so the dysregulation, I think, is a big one, because I think it's really kind of underestimated, or maybe like just not as well known, that that shows up in sex and relationships more than just, maybe than what we think.
Mhm.
And so I think to kind of, we don't always think of, at least, this may be my like support worker experience coming in, but I feel like we don't always in that space talk about dysregulation in a way in terms of sex and relationships. It's really only about like, solo kind of self-care moment with you and your own sensory needs. And so I think by taking the time to do some reflecting on how dysregulation or how maybe your neurodiversity shows up in your sex and relationships can kind of help to get some self-awareness around what that may look like and how to approach that, and what to tell future partners, and how to, all that kind of stuff. And kind of same with queerness too, right? Like we are learned a lot of the times a very cishet way of sex ed. And so there's also a lot of unlearning in terms of like, what is sex? What does sex even look like to me? If I take it outside of this, you know, classic, typical P and V type penetration, what does sex even look like for me as potentially a trans person, a lesbian, a non-binary person, etc.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and feeling okay with that, like really owning that.
Yes.
Like
Really owning it.
in this
Yes.
podcast, owning your sexual self, like
Yes,
whatever that looks like
exactly.
for you.
It's almost like doing some just like a little bit of uncomfortable work at first to kind of just to feel better. And I feel like to have more of that confidence and that empowerment, especially like sexual empowerment later on
Hmm.
and with partners.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and you brought up two like interesting concept here of like beginning relationships or like one night stands, hookups, like how much different that can look like versus long-term partnerships, right? I wonder, yeah,
Yes.
could we speak to that a little bit more, like for people that
Yeah.
are in the dating world, like how how much about themselves do they share up front when if it does come down to sex or sexuality, or how could they do that more smoothly so it's not like this, okay, let's sit down and have this conversation before you, touch my body.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. I mean, I feel like just with like all type of dating in general, like you kind of have to get some of like the important stuff out of the way before you dive into it, right? Same as with like the talk about like, have you been tested or like that kind of stuff. Like this can all be kind of sometimes awkward and feel like you have to get through that red tape to get through the fun. But I think like you like that's what's important of it, right? Like you kind of have to know a little bit about yourself to then share with others. And it's up to you of how much you want to share with others. Like you can say, you can disclose being neurodiverse or queer, and you don't have to necessarily dive into your whole like backstory and lore on it, right? Like it could just be just a coming out kind of thing, right? Like you're kind of coming out twice in a way, especially if you're a neuroqueer, both as neurodivergent and as a queer person.
Mhm.
And especially if those things like they are part of your identity. So I think it's important to share those with others, and you almost want to be sure or like kind of use it maybe as like a vibe check to see if that person is even going to be compatible with you, or like if they are starting to, I don't know, if you're not getting the greatest vibe from them because you came out as being neurodiverse or queer in some way, then like maybe that's not the person for you. I do have like a little tip that if you're specifically for like the sex part, if you're kind of I guess like if you're about to have sex, you're kind of sussing out like a hookup or like a one night stand kind of thing. Or honestly, even if you're in a long-term relationship too, I think this could be helpful. There's some questions that I think could be helpful to kind of like you could use it as foreplay, but you can also kind of just get into it before the play begins. Question one would be, what are you hoping to get out of the sexual encounter? This time specifically, like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for pleasure? Are you looking for an orgasm? Are you looking to just be held in a certain way? Intimacy? Like, what are you looking for? Why do you want to even have sex right now? And
Mhm.
then question two would be, what can I do to help you achieve this? Or, so for example, like if you are looking for an orgasm, is there a way that you like to be touched? Or is there a sex toy that you like to use that does the job for you? Or
Mhm.
if you were looking for intimacy, do you want to have sex in a certain position? Or like honestly, what does feeling intimate even look like to you? Because that also may be different for different people, right?
Mhm.
So I think by having those two questions and kind of just like I said, you could use it as foreplay, use it as like, what do you want to do? Like what's turning you on right now? Why do you want to have sex right now? But
Mhm.
I think it also kind of like they kind of cover some of those things that we talked about that are more likely to come up for maybe a neurodivergent person, like dysregulation, and also provides a little bit more of that predictability. So ideally, everyone's kind of has a better understanding of what's expected of them, the sex specifically, and it just kind of keeps everyone on the same page.
I love that. Yeah. And I
Thanks.
love that yeah, like just the fun and the play that that can bring in as well. Very helpful.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. It also can be like a fun game, which can make the talk a little bit less
Mhm.
awkward.
Mhm. Yeah. So I'd love to go down, like that was a great tool and any other
Thank
resource
you.
support that you have is you have just a plethora of books behind you. And so I'm curious, like, are there books, resources like on this topic of neuroqueer? I know again it's like a newer label title, but just curious what
I
you
feel like called out in the best way possible. I
I
do. I am a big
love the
reader. I
books.
love to read. Yes. This is my little sex education library. We're growing slowly but surely. Yeah, so I actually have a few books I would love to mention. Number one, I'm going to show it on camera too in case you're
Yay.
watching. This
Uh-huh.
is called Queer Cripple by Andrew Gurza. I don't know if you've heard of Andrew, but he is Canadian and he's like, I would say probably one of the most like top disability sex educators worldwide,
Okay.
specifically with physical disability. He is in a wheelchair. So yeah, and this is his newest book, I think, as of like, I want to say it was like April
Mhm.
2025. And I haven't finished it yet, but it's fabulous so far. So highly recommend both as someone who is potentially like a queer cripple, someone who is queer and has a disability, physical disability, but also as the support worker side, I found it really helpful in terms of like from someone who is a consumer of support worker services themselves. I think as a support worker, there was a lot of helpful tidbits and just like good information to have from that kind of a perspective.
Mhm. Mhm.
Fascinating.
Mhm.
The next one is a bit of a long title, so I'll say it slowly.
Okay.
It's called The Book of Happy, Positive, and Confident Sex for Adults on the Autism Spectrum and Beyond. That one is by Michael John Carley. It's in both physical form, like a physical book, or you can have a downloadable PDF version, which is also accessible.
Mhm.
And I find that one really helpful for navigating sex and relationships for someone who is on the autism spectrum or someone who is in a relationship with someone who is. And then, kind of on the same same kind of vibe. There's another book for about ADHD specifically called ADHD and Us by Anita Robertson.
Mhm.
And that one's like more of a guide that I find like helps couples better understand adult ADHD, because actually a lot of the research done on ADHD has been with kids
Mhm.
specifically.
Mhm.
So it helps to understand adult ADHD a little bit and how that affects relationships, and then has some tools for both partners, which has been really fabulous. And I've used that one myself too. So really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Emily. This has been so wonderful. And as we're moving to a close here, I'd like to go just like over some final reflections. So if
Yeah.
you could share one message with a neuroqueer listener who's feeling unsure, ashamed, disconnected, some one of those things from their sexuality, what is the message? What do you want them to know?
You're not alone. I
Mhm.
think it can be sometimes an isolating experience to think that because you don't experience sex or sex sensory processing in the same way as other folks, that it can feel alienating or othering, especially when you're trying to find someone to potentially either have sex with or start a romantic relationship with. And so you're not alone. There's lots of others that are going through it with you, and even partners of people who are, of people who are neurodiverse or neuroqueer. And yeah, there's community out there in both versions, and both coin sides of the coin kind of thing, being both neurodivergent and queer. And yeah, the community is there, and we're here for you.
Yes. And last question, what lights you up right now? Like what are you excited about? What are you working on? And I guess point two to that is like how can people find you to connect with you?
Oh, I love that. Thank you. You can find me over on Instagram at Emily Zed Sex Ed. One thing I'm really excited about right now is I actually just finished my certification to be a sexuality coach and consultant. So I'm kind of taking the education support working side, and I want to be able to work more one-on-one with folks who are ideally neuroqueer, to kind of help them have the best sex and kind of relationships that is best for them, because that's different for everybody too, right? So yeah, so I'm excited to be working more one-on-one with folks, both in my local community and potentially all over the world. Like I said, I'm on the internet as well. So yeah, that's probably next steps for me.
Yay. Okay, we'll make sure to link all that. We'll link the books in the show notes as well. I think again, I'm a resource junkie over here, so I love when people share resources and especially books, because I think it's so helpful, right? Like the education, the knowledge is really the power behind this. And again, with new
Yes.
things and just our world of sexuality changing, I think it's just so important for people to continue educating them and continue learning about this. Um,
Yes, I actually do. I totally understand that, like, figuring out intimacy as a neuroqueer person is
mhm.
so daunting and may seem even more challenging if you've maybe like recently come out or you've recently been diagnosed. And so, but trust me, like I said, you are not alone. If you want another resource, I've actually created a workbook. It's called Redefining Sex and Communication as a Neuroqueer, and to help you basically become more confident in your sex and relationships, hopefully without all of the awkwardness and dysregulation. The resource is designed to help you redefine your understanding of sex beyond cishet or neurotypical norms, reflect on being how neurodivergent and or being queer impacts your personal perceptions of intimacy. And there's a few fun tools that you can use to communicate your preferences and needs to current or potential partners. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, hey, I'm neurospicy and queer and not feeling so confident about sex right now, you can grab a copy of the workbook for free by clicking the link in the show notes.
Yay! Thank you so much. I also love the term neurospicy. Like that,
It's so fun.
I love that so much.
Yes. It's just like a cutesier, fun way to say it, right?
Yes, like I that needs to be on a t-shirt for sure. Like if you ever do end up doing merch or swag or something, like neurospicy needs to be on a t-shirt for sure.
Me writing this down as an idea right now.
Yes. Well, thank you again so much, Emily, for coming on the show today. And yeah, we'll find you on Instagram at Emily Zed Sex Ed, right? I was like, is that
Yes,
like I
yeah.
love the
Thank you
like
so.
ring to it. Yeah, for
I was
sure.
gonna say it's Canadian, so you gotta have the Z in there, but
Yes. All right.
thank you so much, Rachel. I really love this conversation. It was so fun.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you loved it, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And if you really fucking loved it, make sure to tag me on social media at the Rachel Main. I'll see you next week.